So recently, I was called out by a far left streamer by the name of Kasia. She reacted to a couple of my videos, said a bunch of really rude stuff about me, and I think she did a pretty bad job of representing my views. So I reached out to her, and to my surprise, she agreed. How did this confrontation go? You're gonna have to watch to find out. If you guys want to watch a full interview, it's up on our channel. You guys can see that I'm not trying to misconstrue anything.
One of the things that pissed me off that I was ranting about when I was watching your videos was the anecdote that you told about how you met like two guys that were working at Biedronka and didn't know the language.
Oh yeah.
And you
Yeah.
feel it's offensive like to the country that they live in, and that you make the effort because you have private lessons 3 times a week to learn Polish. And I just wanted to ask you if you can see like your privilege, the privilege that it takes to be able to have money and time to go to a private lessons 3 times a week. And maybe like
Sure.
it seemed obvious to me that if you're working at Biedronka instead of making YouTube videos like us, it might be even harder. And even you, like going to 3 private lessons a week, you are not fully able to speak Polish fluently yet. So you know it's hard.
You're right. I know how protective Polish people are of their language, right? And something that I got a lot of heat on my channel and my videos is when I talk about reforming the Polish language, because I say that how long is it going to be before English becomes the official language of Polish? And I joked about that. Then when I saw these workers in Biedronka not speaking Polish, then what does that mean? Like, are a lot of these stores going to be with all these foreigners, and since they don't speak Polish, is it just going to be English? You're right. Making YouTube videos, my Polish is not fluent yet. It's a very hard language. But working in Biedronka in Poland, isn't speaking Polish like a minimum requirement? I think, like, how would you be able to communicate with the customers if you don't speak Polish, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
I was more from like that aspect and wondering like, okay, is this going to be a problem in the future?
I thought it was interesting that she used this argument of like, oh, you being able to learn Polish and pay for Polish lessons, you're privileged to learn the language. But that doesn't make sense to me, because I'm like, so you're defending foreigners coming to this country and refusing to learn the Polish language because of how hard it is and they're not privileged enough? How is that good for the country? That's not good for Poland at all. And I know how defensive Poland is about their language, especially the older folk. If you're a foreigner here and you don't speak Polish, they kind of get angry with you. And I think that's rightfully so, right? If you've been living here, it's basic respect to learn the language. So I had to hard disagree with what she was saying. And then she used the whole privilege argument, which I didn't think was a good argument at all.
You know, are foreigners just choosing not to speak Polish? Maybe we can talk about that, because I think it's very difficult for foreigners to learn. And then at what point is there like 2 separate societies in Poland, where you have the Polish people who speak Polish with each other and all the foreigners who don't learn Polish and they can't really interact with the Poles, and then that's kind of where you have conflicts in countries, and that.
Yeah,
I just
don't really see it like that. Even though I agree that it can make problems when the Biedronka cashier don't know Polish and there's this lady that doesn't know English and she has a problem, but I believe they have some systems put up for. I think they have it figured out in Biedronka. Like there's another cashier that maybe translates. I don't fully agree with your prediction of like the split for 2 Polish societies, that one doesn't even know Polish, because like me observing the countries around the world that are becoming like the spot that immigrants usually go to, they have these immigrant communities, like in the US, a lot of people like speak Spanish in the US, right? And there's always going to be this part of the immigrant population that doesn't know the language yet. And some of them maybe won't even learn it at all, because you know it's hard to learn a whole new language when you're an adult. But they're children. It
is difficult as an adult, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And she's actually making excuses for immigrants that refuse to integrate into the countries that they're going to. And this is, I think, the biggest hole in her logic. And I think maybe she just couldn't agree with me because it goes against a lot of her like left-leaning philosophies. The problem with the left is that they put compassion over everything. It doesn't matter if the negative consequences of this mindset will negatively affect Poland. We still have to be compassionate. Being compassionate and understanding people's situation is the right thing to do. And I think being compassionate is good. The problem is that there are cheaters in every system, And there's a lot of people out there that will manipulate your compassion to try to take advantage of you. I think a lot of people, especially women like her that come from Western countries that are very safe, high trust societies, don't know the reality of the world out there and low trust societies, and how a lot of people out there don't have your best intentions at heart and see that you're kind and will try to take advantage of that for their personal gain. There's a lot of low trust societies like that. Ukraine is one of them, which is why I said earlier in the video that Ukrainian culture and Polish culture are very different. Unfortunately, Ukraine is a very corrupt country, very big wealth disparity between the haves and the have-nots. It's a low trust society. People aren't necessarily violent the same way that they are in Latin America, but talk to any Ukrainian, they'll tell you that the people that want to scam them the most are other Ukrainians. I think here in Poland, because a lot more people are in the middle class, it's a more developed country, it's very safe, especially for women. So they don't know the dangers of how crazy it can be out there, right? Being able to walk on the street any time of night without anything happening to you that's the true privilege. And it takes a lot to get to that point of safety in the country, which is why I think it's a miracle that you have that in Poland, because there are so many countries in the world where you can't even do that, including the United States, which is technically like this first world country, but we don't really feel safe in the streets anymore. So that's why I think this is the biggest hole in their logic.
And it always somehow it works. Maybe those guys in Biedronka, they just got here. They're really trying.
Sure.
They're making, I feel like you're just being unfair by assuming that they just refuse to learn. Maybe they're trying,
Well,
but
whoa. I didn't say that they refuse to learn.
Maybe not them, but I'm sure that you use this word pretty a lot, that the people just refuse to learn Polish. And I don't feel it's like it's often the case.
Do you have a lot of foreigner friends? How many foreigners do you know? How many of them speak Polish, percentage-wise?
I think like half of them maybe speak Polish, yeah.
Oh wow, that's actually really good. Yeah, that surprised me.
On different level, like those living in Poland, yeah, maybe half of them. It depends on. Some people just have it like a very, like a talent, languages. I know a guy who's here for a year and he speaks great, but also it also depends on your privilege, on how many languages you already know, because your brain is then wired to learn quicker.
That's true.
Or also how many time and money do you have? But also this Polish is then hard, and I'm fully
it's so freaking hard. I hate it. It's so
hard. Yeah, I just told you about my podcast co-host, Danny. He's getting better and better, but still we make this podcast in English. And also I know some people, I worked in game dev for a while, and game dev is full of foreigners. And yes, a lot of them, Ukrainians and Belarusians usually speak Polish great. But but people from
so out of all the foreigners that I know, if they're not Ukrainian or Russian, 95% of them don't speak Polish, and they've been here 3, 5, 6 years. I got my buddy outside. He's from Jamaica. He's been here 5 years. Doesn't speak a lick of Polish.
Yeah.
Not a bit of all that, but like but this I'm seeing this, right? So we live in different realities. We know that like two groups of people, but this is something that I'm seeing in my everyday. You said something interesting, because you said that you observe other countries around the world. The reason why I personally think is the problem is because I'm from Los Angeles. I was spent.
And okay, so this is a very interesting point. A lot of her opinions are based off of things that she's seen on the internet. I don't think she's lived outside of Poland. She only visited the US once for a week, and yet she has this strong opinion on how immigration should work and all these things. And in my opinion, a lot of her viewpoints are very naive. This problem with immigration exists in almost every country around the world. When I was in Colombia, they had a problem with Venezuelan immigrants. It was very similar to the dynamic between Polish people and Ukrainians. In the US, we think this way. In the US, we think this way about Latinos, or people from like Latin America coming into our country. Canada, they feel the same way about Indians. The UK feel the same way about the Pakistanis and all these Muslim immigrants coming into the country. This is not a new phenomenon. So when I make these comments about parallel societies and causing issues, I'm simply observing that this is happening all around the world. And she's saying like, it's possible that it could work out. It could totally work. But she's just like kind of buying into this fantasy. And I grew up in LA and I saw what happens when you have all these parallel societies. And that's why the US is so divided. We can't agree on anything because we all have different value systems. But if you look at a lot of Western Europe is falling apart because you have this constant battle between Western Europe ideologies and all these immigrants that are trying to bring their culture into those countries too. I just think that's something that she either refuses to acknowledge or doesn't see it because it's extremely naive. Because I don't know how much she's traveled. I forgot to ask her that question, but a lot of my opinions just come from my personal experience traveling to all these countries, spending an extended period of time, talking to locals, seeing how things work. And I just come to like my own conclusions, right? So I think this is one of the big disagreements that we have.
And 25 years of my life there, I knew a lot of people from all races, Mexicans, Taiwanese people. They've been in the US for like 15, 20 years, still don't speak English. I think that's unacceptable. I think if you are an immigrant in any country around the world, it's your job as the immigrant to learn that language. Full stop. And that's just the basic common respect that you can give as an immigrant. I'm a guest in this country, right? So I have to behave well like a guest. And I'm not saying you have to speak perfect Polish, right? Because we're in agreement. Polish is freaking difficult. But what makes me mad is that a lot of guys, or not guys, but a lot of people in general just don't even try. They just hear Polish is very difficult and all Poles speak English. So they're just like, I don't care. And that I think is a really big problem. And when it comes to like separate communities, right, it is a big issue because different communities have different values, especially when religion gets involved. In the UK, I think is a really good example. You kind of have this double society living between the Brits and then the people, the Islamic people, Pakistanis, who have been there for a couple of generations. A lot of those kids, they're fully British and they're into British culture, right? A lot of religious people in general, when they don't agree with something, they always just quote the Bible or the Quran for a reason not to do that. And I know that's a big problem here in Poland too. I saw one of your videos that a lot of the conservative government, like the Catholic Church is a big problem here in Poland. And they use religion to mix into the government and then to form the society in a certain way, right? So imagine you have two societies. You have one that's Islam, you have one that's a Christian society. How can you get those two agree when religions are such a deep parts of those societies?
That's actually a very interesting question, considering the history of Poland,
that's
who
a
used
banger,
to be like
bro.
this hub historically for many religions,
Yes.
for both Muslims and Jewish people and Christians.
Yes, I've heard, yeah.
And they all got along to a point, of course, that we all know what point was it. But
That's exactly right.
you know, when I studied this topic a lot because, you know, I'm interested in politics and in societal studies. Yeah. So what I see in the data is that immigrants usually become more conservative and like isolated and extreme the worse their conditions of living are. So the societies that deal best with like integration of the society, the societies where immigrants blend well, and then maybe children adopt more of a culture of the country while still respecting their roots, are the countries that take care of free lessons of the language, take care of like workers' rights, even for the immigrants who are undocumented, perhaps. So those extreme views and radicalisms, they grow on inequality, they grow on frustration of people. And I don't know if you know that, but most of the like terrorists around the world that are like not like school shooters in US, but those people who like bombed France or something, they are usually second, third generation immigrants who saw their parents struggle and who keep struggling, and this radicalized these radical groups are the only way for them to find the way to express that frustration.
And she's justifying people doing terrorist attacks because they lived in a bad situation. That is so dangerous. Because she's using this guise of compassion, you have to understand where they came from. But I'm like, I don't care where they came from. I know a lot of immigrants that grew up very poor, but followed the rules, and now they're wealthy, and now they're thriving and doing well. So this is not a real argument. And this is what is the most dangerous part about the left, I think, is that they want to they use compassion to try to humanize criminals. This whole entire thing that she was talking about with like all of the terrorists are second or third generation of immigrants. So this exactly proves my point is like if you let in a group of immigrants that have drastically different values and they radicalize, then they're going to cause issues in your society. And this is exactly what's happening in the UK right now. This is what's happening in the US in Los Angeles with the riots, with people waving the Mexican flags and rioting all over the city. She could have studied a lot. Study can only get you so far. I try to pay attention to what's actually happening in real world events. And you should make your judgments and your opinions based on what's actually happening, not just theory.
You think that's okay?
What
To like
exactly
to
is it?
riot and to cause issues and to steal from other people because you feel justified because your position in society is low.
I don't feel
Is
it's
that okay?
okay to steal. No, no, of course not. But
Mm.
but if you ask me if protests are okay, yes. And there, of course, there's like a boundary of how can you express your anger and how you can protest, but that boundary is different for everyone. For example, some people would call me like a criminal because during the black protests in Poland, when we were protesting the abortion rights, I was like spray
Mm.
painting walls. So that's a
Ooh.
violation for a lot of people, right?
Ah,
But I feel it was
yeah, but like here in
justified.
Poland, there's graffiti everywhere, so I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is one of my problems with the left too, is like, what does that accomplish? You're spray painting about abortion rights. Is that going to convince people that abortion is right? Is that going to convince people to come on your side? Or is it just a way for you to act out, essentially throwing kind of like a tantrum to get your point across to draw attention to yourself? And this is why I'm actually heavily against protesting in general. I think that a lot of protesting is a waste of time. And if you really want to see change in the world, you have to be the person that acts that change. Make a lot of money and then use that money to maybe do some charities or some nonprofits to help change the issues that you really care about. But I feel like a lot of protesting is just like, these are the problems that I think are wrong, and you need to fix them. And then if you don't fix them, I'm just gonna act out and thrash everything and riot until you guys fix them. And I just don't think that's an effective way of making change in society.
But still, I think it was justified because the means were maybe questionable for some, but the cause that we're fighting for is really important. And it's not even the question of what is right or what is wrong. When you're running a country, you just know that if you're not gonna take care of the safety net for people, they're gonna get frustrated and they're gonna cause troubles and the crime rates are gonna go up. It's just simple data.
But is it the job of a host country to take care of other people immigrating into their country over the well being of their own citizens? This is the main problem, and this is what is causing a lot of the issues with immigration all around the world. A lot of governments nowadays are prioritizing the wants and needs of people that are not even from this country, that are trying to come into the country and give them all this care, housing, funding, healthcare, education. Why is it the host country's job to take care of people that are not citizens? That to me doesn't make any sense. And sure, I know her point of view is going to be like, well, we have to be understanding, but who's going to pay for this? Where's the money going to come from? And when people are now competing for jobs and competing for housing, because housing is very expensive, this is a direct effect of letting all these people in and the government prioritizing immigrants over their own country.
So it's not even a question of
Okay,
what's
that's
right and
fair.
what's wrong, but how to efficiently run a country.
So this is why racism in the US is so weird because I'm not just American. I'm Asian first and then I'm American. This is why America is so unique compared to all the other countries is because America is a country founded by immigrants.
Mhm.
So we're all kind of like trying to coexist together, but there's no real social values that really link us all together. And you made a point earlier that is very important. You say that you can have kids in a new country if your parents are immigrants, and then they can equally adopt the countries of the new country and respect their roots.
That's an important point.
I'm speaking from personal experience, and I think a lot of people who are the children of immigrants feel this. It's not easy at all. And so on the first part, we feel lost because I'm not Chinese enough for my Chinese siblings, but I'm not American enough to be American. So we're kind of like lost in this halfway point, which is really, really awkward. But also, growing up, my parents are trying to enforce certain values and lessons in the household, but I was learning completely something different from school, from media, from my babysitters, and that caused a lot of conflict in our household. A lot of the fights that I had with my parents were because America culture was teaching me, oh, you can talk back to your parents. They shouldn't treat you like that. My sister fucking called what is it, Child Protection Services? No, she didn't call, but she said some shit to her teacher that my dad like spanked her. And then because of that, they called Child Protection Services to our house, and that caused a huge issue, right? But then in a lot of cultures, especially in the East, so like Africa, Middle Eastern cultures, Asian cultures, and I think Slavic cultures too, getting smacked by your parents or spanked or the belt or the klapki, right? It's kind of a natural part of how we grew up. So that's like one example. Another example is America's view on sex is completely different than the Chinese view on sex. America is extremely liberal. Chinese view is very strict. So how do you balance that as a teenager growing up, especially with social media, now that you're being fed all these different informations? It's very, very difficult. So that's why integration is really hard. We're always in this kind of middle confused phase. We don't know exactly where we stand. You know what I'm saying?
Bars. Yeah.
And then when it comes down to it,
I don't have much to add. I thought that was a good point. I said it.
Let's say China and America goes to war. I'm going to be considered a bad, like the enemy from both sides. So that just makes things even more confusing. And then if I had to pick one or else my family's going to die, like which one do I align with, right? It brings up a lot of different issues. What if Ukraine and Poland went to war? All the Ukrainians here, do you trust that they're going to fight for Poland, or you think they're going to leave and go fight for Ukraine? This is an interesting thing to talk about, right?
It's more in the hypothetical, because there is no reason to believe that would be a war between Ukraine and Poland. There are some reasons.
Why not? Historically, there were events,
but
right?
Like now, that's there were some events, like I think you know some of the historical
massacre
issues.
of Stan. What is it? Massacre of Stan. What's his name?
Bowen, I think.
A big controversial figure between Ukraine and Poland, right? In Ukraine, he's like a war hero, and I saw a couple of his statues when I went to visit Ukraine. But then here in Poland, you guys view him as like a genocide guy.
Absolutely, there are some historical issues between. Oh, you mean Bandera? The chat asks.
Yes, that guy. Yes.
So absolutely, there are some historical issues, but I think between any country that is Poland's neighbor, there are some historical animosities between us. But in our current reality, it's not possible. There would be a war between Ukraine and Poland.
And this is another, like, I think she's coming from a very naive place. These two countries would never go at war. But history shows that over a long enough time span, people are gonna get into war for whatever reason, right? This is the natural history of humanity, is war. I was trying to make this point just as a hypothetical, and she was shooting down the hypothetical like it would never happen, so she could avoid answering the question. This is a very valid topic. And this goes back to the whole entire immigration thing in general. It's like, you have to be careful with the people that you let in. I'm not saying that Ukrainians are bad people if they were to stay here and fight for Poland, or if they were to go back to Ukraine. But it does pose this really interesting conflict within the people of, like, who do I line up with? You have these two cultures that are the same race, right? They're both white. But what if there's also an added layer of different ethnicities on top of that? That just makes things way more confusing.
Also,
okay.
Like geopolitical
what about Germany
state of the world? No, we are both in the European Union and in NATO. So what? I don't see a possibility. No, we are also allies with Ukraine, and we are in NATO. So we are like against Russia, and Russia is a huge threat for us. So Ukraine is our more natural ally. I cannot imagine a reality and a possible reason for us to go to war with Ukraine.
And this goes back to living a very easy and privileged life. And this is why a lot of Americans actually think the same way. They have no reality or idea of what war is. And they're seeing all these wars around the world, and they're, oh, you know, free Palestine, my heart goes out to Ukraine or whatever. But they're completely separated from everything. They have no idea what it's like. And war can really happen at any time for whatever reason.
America and China are natural rivals. So that's a little bit more reasonable to assume they would go to war.